Hey apes, this is going to be a short screencast on human population, specifically on population and the pyramids. So with population problems in the world, the biggest issue is poverty. And then what that does is it leads to food problems, the standards of living go down, and there are really big environmental consequences of consumption and a lot of overcrowding that goes on. This all has to do with increased human population and not having enough resources. So three main revolutions that the human population went through. You had the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago. We went from hunting and gathering to that agricultural planting a farm essentially lifestyle. And then anywhere between 200 to 300 years ago was the Industrial Revolution. And what we did was we moved from rural areas, so from that agricultural lifestyle, into the cities. And that allowed for a much greater density of people, and that was the first major increase in human population. And then the third revolution is the Green Revolution, and this was in the US. It was in about the 50s and the 60s, and that was your advances in your farming technology, and it increased the amount of food that was grown. The human population was growing so rapidly, we needed to come up with new methods of farming and new organisms to grow, like genetically modified organisms, to actually feed the growing human population. So with human population growth, it's been growing since about 10,000 years ago. And right now, the world population is over 7 billion, and we add about 80 million people a year to that equation. However, we are growing exponentially, so that number is actually increasing a bit of how many people are added to the Earth every year. So new projections put the world between 8 and 12 billion in 2050, and almost all of that growth is expected in the developing nations. So not so much developed nations, but in the developing worlds. 8 to 12 billion is a huge spread of numbers. So developing countries, Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia are your developing countries. And that's where most of the population growth is happening. You guys saw in Japan from the video, A World in the Balance, that Japan's population is actually shrinking drastically and causing lots of issues. So here's just an image, and it shows the one time in human population growth, the history of the human population, that the population actually dropped, and that was the bubonic plague in the 1400s in Europe. And ever since the Industrial Revolution began, you've had exponential growth. Then you had the Green Revolution, your advances in science and medicine, and now the technology. You have exponential growth. You can see right here, this is your growth pattern going up like that, and the same thing here. That's your exponential growth. So with your human population growth growing exponentially, the population gets larger the faster it grows. And an increase in life expectancy is mostly to blame for this exponential growth. We have better healthcare, hospitals, medicines, vaccines. We have more food, more access to it, and it is better and more nutritious for us. We have clean water. You're not getting cholera from drinking water. And we have better sanitation. Nobody's pooping in a corner. Okay. The biggest increase in population is in, again, these economically developing countries rather than your economically developed countries. So the disparities look like this. In your developed countries, they have 15% of the world's population, but they control 80% of the world's wealth. In your low income, in your developing countries, your less developed countries, they have 37% of the world's population, and they control 3% of the world's gross national income. Okay. The difference in per capita income is 63 to 1, which is absolutely insane. As you can see in this graph, the more developed countries, their population is basically stable, but your less developed countries are increasing rapidly. So we need to get the less developed countries into more developed countries as quickly as possible. As far as world population trends go, there are three possible futures. We can slow fertility, so you can reduce your total fertility rate, and we will level out. Okay, if we stay on the current path, you can see that green line, we're going to keep going up, and our population is going to keep growing into scary, scary numbers. And if we have rapid fertility reduction, like they did in China with the one-child policy, or they did in Japan, then we will have a drop in the population. So what we can see here is that you have accelerated world population growth. So in 1804, we had our first billion people. Okay? Then in 123 years later, we added another billion, another billion, another billion, and another billion. And as you can see here, it's taken less and less time to actually add that next billion. Okay? We also have something called doubling time, and that's the amount of time it takes to double the population. So right now our population is at 7 billion. So the amount of time it would take to double, we would be calculating when the population will be 14 billion. Okay? So as time actually increases, your doubling time is going to decrease because of the rapid growth that you have. So here is the graph form of a histogram called a population profile or a population pyramid. And what it is it's the snapshot of a population. So this one is the Philippines in 1997. And if you look, the bottom has the population. For this particular one, it is population in millions. On the left-hand side, you have males. On the right-hand side, you have females. And in the middle, you have the age ranges. So if you're looking at this specific bar right here, you're going to see there are just over 5 million females ages 0 to 4 in the Philippines population in 1997. There are 3 general categories for age structure diagrams. So everything has to do with when you can reproduce. So your pre-reproductive years are generally 0 to 14. Reproductive is 15 to 44, and post-reproductive we call 45 and older. These numbers have changed a lot. Some people say that this is 12, some people say it's 10, and now this is up to 50 years. But in general, this in the middle is going to be your population that's going to be reproducing. The ones on top have already reproduced, they're done reproducing, and these guys on the bottom haven't started reproducing yet. So they will soon reproduce. But that then, with this information, you can then make predictions of the future growth of this population. Okay. So taking a look at this, do you think this profile represents a growing population or a declining population, and why? Okay, so here you've got, these are your pre-reproductive years, okay, and then what you have here is your reproductive years, so these people are reproducing, and then up top you have your population that is done reproducing. So take a minute, answer those questions. So as you guys will see, human age structure varies from country to country. And again, we're going to throw in the more developed country and the less developed country. So in developing countries, age structures tend to be in favor of younger individuals, with a large proportion being under 15. So these developing nations, okay, the less developed countries, they're going to have bigger bottoms because they're going to have a population momentum, a population that's usually growing fairly rapidly. Whereas in developed nations, your age structure is going to be relatively even throughout. So if you look at here, Sweden has a relatively even growth of population, and it seems like they have for quite some time. So same thing with this. Take a look here. You can pause the video and answer the following questions to the left. Which age structure diagram has the most young people? Which has more men than women at age 80 plus, and which age structure diagram has the fewest elderly people? So a little more information. These are your generalized population age structure diagrams. So here you have your population that is expanding rapidly. A very big, wide bottom. You have a lot of pre-reproductive. This country here is expanding slowly. The US, Australia, and China are all expanding very slowly. Stable populations, you have, they're pretty stable all the way down, and then your declining population is going to dip in at the bottom. So in these countries here especially, you're going to have less of that pre-reproductive group and less that are actually reproducing as well. And here you can see rapid growth is this country. Then you have your slow growth. It seems like it's growing. Okay, it has dropped in the past. So this is your slow growth, and then you have your decline in growth. So your population that is actually then decreasing. Okay. So in the U.S., there's a little case study we like to talk about, and that's the American baby boom. So about 80 million people, about 40% of the adults in America are actually baby boomers. It affects politics and economics, and all of these baby boomers are retiring. They're becoming senior citizens. They're drawing from Social Security, and we're calling this the graying of America. And in this image here, you can actually track the baby boom generation. So in 1955, that's about when the baby boomers were born, okay? And they were born because there were good economic times. World War II was over, and the industry and the economy was booming, and you could afford to have babies. And then in 1985, you saw they were in their 20s and 30s. They were having babies. And now in the 2015, 2016, they're in their 50s and their 60s, and they're starting to come to this retirement age, and that is taking a big toll on our economy. And then in 2035, you'll see they'll be in their 70s and 80s, and eventually that bubble will be off of the population pyramid. Not something necessarily that we want, but as this population goes through the demographic, this population pyramid, it does have stark consequences on our economics.